I'm Ani Ward, and I'm the coordinator of the Speaker Series program. Throughout the winter and summer seasons, we give voice to the organizations and the individuals that make Taos, Taos. And we have brought Laura McCarthy back today and a panel of speakers that she will go ahead and introduce. But Laura has been with us in the past. She has worked with the Nature Conservancy for over 13 years. She founded the Rio Grande Water Fund, helped create the Taos Valley Watershed Coalition, and in the middle of this March became the state forester for the state of New Mexico. So round of applause for Laura McCarthy.
I'll just tell you first about what our format is going to be. So myself and Collin Haffey, who is with the Nature Conservancy, where he's the conservation coordinator, we are going to give an introduction that should last about 20 minutes. There will be some slides involved, a video involved, and we're going to kind of set the stage. And then we're going to go to the panel of four, including Gabe Donaldson with the Nature Conservancy in Colorado, who is a fire manager and an expert in prescribed fire. And then we'll go to Jack Lewis with the US Forest Service, very identifiable. We are in the Carson National Forest on the Cuesta District, and Jack is really a career Forest Service employee with experience throughout the Intermountain West. Then we'll go to J.R. Logan, who is with the Cerro Negro Forest Council, resident of San Cristobal, so local here, and as well has been a newspaper reporter for the Taos News, so if his name seems familiar, that's probably why. And then we will also have Rene Romero. Actually, I'm going to reverse your order. JR, you're going to be last. I just remembered this. Hope you remember that. So Rene, you'll follow Jack. Rene is with Taos Pueblo. He's a former smoke jumper, and he currently is in the Natural Resources Department at the Pueblo de Taos. So that's the introductions of all the people and our format. Maybe the title here caught your attention, and the order of things there is very important. The context for what we're going to be talking about today is really wildfire and fire's natural role in forested areas and the way fire is behaving today. Collin is going to give a little bit of a primer on fire ecology for those who are unfamiliar with it. And, but let me say this, that one of the things we've learned over the last 20 or so years here in New Mexico is that when we have major wildfires, we have downstream water effects that touch everybody's lives. Whether you're a farmer or a traditional community member relying on acequias, or if you're in Albuquerque and you're wanting clean water to come out of your tap, it affects you. And so creating this fire and forest and water linkage has been very, very important. The jobs part is also really important, especially in our rural communities. We know that the basic solution to the problem of fire behaving differently and creating water impacts is to scale up our cutting and removing of overgrown brush and trees that act as fuel for future fires and that create unnatural fire conditions. In order to do that work, we need people, and that means jobs in rural communities. But how we actually get that to happen is very complicated, and so our panel will cover that as well. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Collin. I did leave one thing out of the process. We have 25 minutes reserved for your questions and for dialogue among us. And I want to recognize that there are some other fire experts, fire, water, and jobs experts in the room, people who have been partners from the very beginning. And so hopefully you know who you are and you'll speak up and contribute actively to the discussion. All right, so you ready?
Great. Thank you, Laura. And thank you to Nani for inviting us up here. And anytime we talk about doing any sort of active management in the, in the forest, we always try to ground that in very strong science. And for this particular piece, we have strong science that's actually carried out right here in the Taos Ski Valley. So we're sitting on top of a research area. I think a lot of you will recognize this picture here. And when you see this picture, I think a lot of us see, great skiing, good opportunities, see it out on the mountains, see some snow. But when a fire ecologist sees this, they see fire. And so this historic fire, right, where you have on the left side an area that has burned at some point in the past, and an area on the right that hasn't burned in the recent past. And zooming in a little bit, you can see sort of in the foreground some deciduous trees, right? So those are most likely aspens, right? We all know that aspens resprout vigorously after any kind of disturbance, including fire. And so here's a picture taken down in the Gila 2 years after fire, and it's almost eaten, this is almost as tall as Rhea, who's pretty short, but still that's pretty good regrowth from some of those after a fire. So what you can do is actually look at those aspen stems and date the aspen to see when those aspen popped up out of the ground. And that's exactly what they did here is they took the patch, they delineated the patch on aerial photos of the aspen, and then cored all of the trees, or cored several trees to see when those aspen popped up. And they all kind of followed a pattern of about 1840 inside of that red area, which is the estimated extent of that 1842 fire. And just looking at it graphically, you can see how important that fire and that disturbance is to having aspen come back onto the landscape. And so what we expect to see is that in this area, this was a pretty high severity fire. So this would have killed most of the trees above ground and allowed for those aspen to come into that area. But from other areas in the Southwest and in New Mexico, we know that high severity fire, this fire that kills all the trees, isn't the only type of fire on the landscape. And we know that a large part of the landscape is dominated by what we call surface fire, fire that just burns on the ground and leaves the trees alive. And so that's what the researchers were searching for in these red dots. So I should mention, I forgot that this research has been done by the New Mexico Landscapes Field Station, a USGS project based out of Santa Fe. Two researchers, Ellis Margolis and Lane Johnson, did most of the work. And the Nature Conservancy and Taos Ski Valley Foundation funded this research. So apologies for that. So in those red areas, what they were doing is looking for evidence of surface fire in these fire-scarred stumps and logs like sitting out on the ground. And so what you do is sample that, so cut it at that stump and then look back through time, dating the rings to see each one of those curls as a fire scar. And you can take it back, starting with something recent, and then walk it back pretty far into time. So the inner ring there, for those of you who can't see, is 1354. So we're able to work back pretty far. And what they found in this area, this is from Manzanita Canyon, so just down the road. And what the researchers found was that fire was burning in that surface area, on the surface in some of these dry conifers in that mid-elevation, so you're right around 8,500 feet, about every 30 years, so 25 to 30 years. And so what that does is create an open, more open forest. This is a restoration project, but this is what we expect some of our old forests to look like. If you came at a time machine and just popped back to 1750, you would see a forest with a lot of big trees, a lot of yellow bark, open stands with pretty clear evidence of fire. Turn of the century, 1900s, we start to mess with the forest in a way that ends up getting us in trouble, right? So we have overgrazing, mismanagement of forest, too much logging, and then we have, Smokey Bear comes in 1930s and he's really telling us fire is bad, and so it's a waste of all of these resources. And that leads us to forests that look like this. And you get these forests that then, when that surface fire comes through, burning in that grass in the lower right-hand corner, it and burns up into those small diameter trees, it immediately goes up into the crown, and you get fires that look like this. And so this is not a surface fire. This is not a fire that we would consider healthy in those mid-elevation ranges. This isn't something that would have been common in that tree ring record that goes back to 1350. And it threatens our communities. This is Los Conchas in 2011 outside of Los Alamos. And importantly, it threatens and, degrades our watersheds. And so when you get that high severity fire, that tree killing fire, that goes from the bottom of the watershed in the drainage where it's not natural and it's not common, to the top of the drainage where maybe it was a little bit more common, you actually get this whole connection of high severity fire from sort of the mountaintops to the farms and the communities downstream. And what that does is it turns our normally pretty small rivers and streams into these muddy torrents. And so this is just after a light sprinkle, and then after a monsoon rain. And this is for Joles Canyon and Bandelier National Monument. For any of those of you who are familiar, that runs at normally about 70 CFS, and this is 7,000 to 9,000 CFS. So essentially the Rio Grande at Otoe Bridge running through for Joles Canyon. So doing quite a bit of damage to our watersheds. Again, a before picture and an after picture, and you can see just quite a bit of devastation in that riparian corridor. And all of that sediment that has washed out, that has been captured in there by those vegetation, is moving downstream. And this is 4 years after the fire. It continues to just move all of that sediment downstream and be really flash flood. So what can we do about it? The things, and these folks here are more of an expert at this than me. One thing we need to do is start by coming in sometimes with chainsaws and crews to do some thinning to remove that ladder fuel, those small trees that have grown up in that 100 years of fire suppression. And then often we'll burn that fuel, the logs, we call it fuel. If we get into vernacular, please stop us. All of those small diameter trees and the logs will burn in piles just to get that, to start to recycle those nutrients and get that material out of the landscape. And eventually what we want to do is allow fire to play its natural role in this system as a keystone process and burn gently, like in this picture, across the ground. And again, in the Southwest, fire is our nutrient recycler. Things don't rot very fast around here, so we need that fire to pull those nutrients out that are captured in the logs and the twigs and the needles and put it back into the forest. And that's how you get a healthy forest that's, one that can withstand a warming climate. So Laura mentioned talking about scaling up, and I think that this video that was produced by Lore Foundation does a really good job of describing how we move from these scientific foundations and an understanding of the need into a project that actually covers 7 million acres and can treat 30,000 acres a year.
So while you're queuing it up, I'm just going to say, so what this film is going to show is the Rio Grande Water Fund, which is a public-private partnership started by the Nature Conservancy to restore 600,000 acres in northern New Mexico.
The Hurtado Valley is in the heart of northern New Mexico. The valley was named after my great-grandpa Elias Hurtado. And so was I. I am a 10th generation rancher from the Norte. That's my father Raul, my tío Diego, my grandpa Ernesto Hurtado, and my crazy cousins from town. This is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and I am grateful to be from here. We have have a lot of cousins around here. And a lot of neighbors who my family has known for generations that are just like family. In northern New Mexico, there are tons of small communities with names like San Cristobal, Vadito, Peñasco, Chamizal, and Trampas that are alive and trying to thrive. Here, we have always depended on the forest for all sorts of things, from warming our homes, to grazing our cattle, to providing jobs and livelihoods for lots of people that live here in the norte. We depend on the forest and the water to survive. They are both so important to our way of life, our history, and our future. It wouldn't take much for all of our beauty and resources to be taken away by a huge wildfire. Wildfires can ruin entire watersheds that provide for the whole state. A massive fire in the north can affect water all the way to Española, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and all the places in between. That exact thing happened not far from here just a few years ago. The Las Conchas fire wrecked watersheds that people depend on for their drinking water. Fires have always been a part of the forest, but not fires that big. My dad knows a lot about forests. He broke it down for me. Since more and more humans started settling here, we began protecting our homes and our power lines. We started putting out fires that happen naturally. Those natural fires used to clean the forest out, but now there's all this fuel everywhere, just waiting to burn. My dad says this is what a healthy forest should look like. And this one needs a good thinning. My community saw how devastating these fires could be, and we decided to do something about it. We teamed up with the Rio Grande Water Fund. We got organized and we started managing the forest in our surrounding mountains. It was really cool seeing everybody come together for the health of our monte. My tío found a good job thinning the forest, and now he's got so much wood that he'll probably never run out. Because of the work we did locally, the people who rely on our water downstream are now better protected. And now if we do have a wildfire, we can manage it, instead of watching it destroy everything we love about this place. We did our small part to try to make a difference, but there's much more to do. We need more people to get involved to protect our forest, our unique cultures, and our precious water supply. So my kids and my kids' kids can enjoy the land of enchantment too. Please find out more about how the Rio Grande Water Fund can help your community prevent a catastrophic wildfire.
She's a good spokesperson. And so the Rio Grande Water Fund has been supported by the Taos Valley Foundation to do work in the Taos area, forming the Taos Valley Watershed Coalition. And now the Taos area is serving as a model for the state. So with that, we're now going to go to Gabe and talk about some of the tools in the toolbox for managing fire.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Gabe Donaldson. I'm the Colorado Fire Program Manager. I come from a kind of a long background of fire suppression. I believe I was on the Lost Conscious fire, in fact. And around 2016, I made the transition to the Nature Conservancy because I wanted to be a part of proactive fire management. The Colorado chapter has tasked me with increasing the pace and scale of prescribed fire throughout the Front Range of Colorado, primarily in ponderosa pine ecosystems. They've also tasked me with increasing training and capacity at the local level throughout Colorado and northeast New Mexico. So I guess I want to touch on what prescribed fire is real quick, just so we're all on the same page. Prescribed fire is the controlled and planned application of fire to the landscape to meet specific ecological and, in some cases, social objectives. So that could include burning shortgrass prairie to increase mountain plover habitat, or rotational burning to increase grass forage for the North American bison. But more often than not, the work in Colorado almost parallels the objectives that we see here in New Mexico as well, where everything that we do, our forest restoration work and prescribed fire work, has some relationship to water health. And we've had our fair share of...
Tip your mic towards the door.
Okay, and we've had our fair share of devastating fires in Colorado as well that have impacted certain watersheds. So it's sort of interesting, and you're probably wondering why is a guy from Colorado down here in New Mexico talking about the Colorado program. Well, interestingly enough, a couple years ago, we established a relationship with Romero Park Ranch, which is one of Ted Turner's properties, about 600,000 acres, pretty much east of Taos Ski Valley. And they wanted us to implement prescribed fire for them. And what I observed was, and what I started to realize was, we were a part of a very big interconnected landscape. Not only is there a lot of really amazing work happening on the New Mexico side, but there's opportunity on the Colorado side to connect large private ranches to federal property and work at a scale and a pace that is more appropriate to see results that we want to see. So in trying to create the greatest impact that I could, what we've started to pilot is the Southern Rockies Training Exchange. And a training exchange is a really cool opportunity for people to put their boots on, learn about prescribed fire, wildfire, ecosystem management, while also implementing prescribed fire. Our first Southern Rockies Training Exchange was about 2 weeks in duration, and we treated over 4,500 acres in that time frame. There are other TREXs, training exchanges, that happen throughout southern Colorado and northern New Mexico as well. The Chama Peak TREX, there was a Taos TREX last year as well, if I recall. And what's really neat is that we're starting to see a landscape and a training exchange events that start to overlap and dovetail with each other. So ultimately, I'm here to talk about training exchanges a little more if folks have questions about those. I'd also like to talk about the work that we're doing in southern Colorado and how that will ideally dovetail and have some secondary or tertiary benefit to the Rio Grande water fund just by virtue of the fact that it's on the periphery of that polygon. So with that said, I look forward to a good panel discussion and some good questions from folks. So thank you.
All right, how's this? Tilted? Well, no, in a minute. So again, I'm Jack Lewis. I'm the district ranger on the Cuesta Ranger District. I just spent most of my career in Colorado, in the southern part of Colorado in the Rio Grande. I was a silviculturist before I did the ranger gig. And it's been great to be here. It's been about 4 years. And I feel like the geek that gets to hang out with the cool kids with this group. Because, you know, when I got here, the collaboration was mostly built to get the Taos Valley Watershed Coalition going and starting on that 600,000 acre goal. And so they had a lot of things in place and a lot of drive and determination, and they've gotten quite a bit done in just the past 4 years that I've seen. We've been able to work through Highway 150 corridor projects and other things that are getting boots on the ground and getting some of these treatments done. So I just wanted to mention a few things going on in the Carson National Forest and surrounding areas that we've got happening. Has anybody mentioned the U.S. Capitol Christmas tree? I'll talk about that later. I only have 5 minutes. We'll talk about that in 20 minutes. But we are going to have a tree on the U.S. Capitol West Lawn this year. So, but back to what we should be talking about. You know, it doesn't really matter what we call the administrations that we have. We work through all of them. You know, as the U.S. Forest Service, it seems like each one has an emphasis on something else. This one has a heavy emphasis on timber and fuels removal. I think that's what we're going to see in any administration we have from this point on, with the conditions we've seen in California and in other areas, the definite need to be treating fuels everywhere. I don't think that's going to slow down, and I think we're going to be big drivers in making sure that happens. And you know, one thing is, sometimes that doesn't create a ton of jobs, but like we talked about before, those are super important jobs to the community. It's not like we're going to bring in a bunch of factories, but we're going to be bringing in, you know, opportunities to work with youth out in the field. We're going to be bringing in some CCC or some Conservation Corps folks. We're going to be bringing in, you know, a lot of people for training opportunities and that type of thing. It's already been happening. So there's a lot of opportunity to get out, both for contractors working on things and the bigger equipment, and then folks out there with running chainsaws and just getting this material out of there. The material never stops. It's like just a constant, you know, sometimes we'll burn a chunk of acreage and we'll sit on it for maybe 20 years and not get back to it. You know, and we talked about how often those fires are happening. We should be in a lot of areas a lot more often than we can. And we can't touch everywhere. We have a lot of wilderness that some areas we'll just kind of let burn. We can't actively manage everywhere, but those areas that we are going to actively manage, I think folks need to, it's a lot of change for folks. We shock a lot of folks when we get a project passed and then all of a sudden we're thinning right next to their property and they weren't quite aware of what was happening. So we get a lot of kickback on that sometimes, but it's change that messes with a lot of folks. It's seeing something that hasn't happened maybe in your lifetimes. In a lot of people's lifetimes, they haven't seen this emphasis on trying to get the ecosystem back into shape. So we're going to have a lot of work going on. At our pace, you know, treating maybe 15,000 acres a year between fire and thinning, just on the forest itself, that's not going to keep up with what we need to treat if we're going to try to keep things on the historical fire regime scale it needs to be. So I think we're looking at an uptick. I think we're looking at a consistent amount of jobs coming up in the future. Another couple of things I wanted to mention.
You're good.
So on the water side, we're doing a lot of work with stream restoration and wetland restoration. A lot of it's been done in the Valle Vidal, and we're looking at trying to get those wetlands back. The focus used to be on, like, how do we get the water down here? How do we get it channeled? How do we get it to our agriculture lands, right? And so now we're thinking, well, we were pretty good at that. So the water comes down really fast, and we've also had, you know, trampling of some of the streams, and so you build these channels, the water moves out pretty fast, and you're done with water in the mountains by like mid-July, you know. How do we, that isn't historically how it happened. We've had these big wetlands, big sponges that used to keep the water up, you know, in the mountains for a longer period of time, so you have water coming out for a longer extended period of time. So we've had the Cordillera Coalition, and we've also had Amigos Bravos, some big partners that have worked with us to try to get some stream restoration done, some wetland restoration done. And what it does in the context of what you saw here was, when you look at those berms that go through those riparian areas, if we've got them built back up to where they're real riparian areas, then you've got a lot more resiliency, and you've got a lot less chance of just cooking that area. And so those are some of the things we're working on, some of the things we're excited about. We're really excited to have these partners.
Good afternoon, Rene Romero. And first off, I want to say thank you for coming. And each one of you is important here. And I say that why? Because you bring something to the table. And the more people that we get engaged in this process, the better off everyone will be. So, why am I up here? You know, I love to play. But number one, I've been playing in the mountains for a very long time. I worked my way up to being a smoke jumper for 16 years. I patrolled on this mountain for 27 years. I lived and played winters and summers in the mountains. That's my home. So I bring an element of connecting to the mountains, to the land. And in a nutshell, there's a lot of wonderful things. Laura and all that everyone is doing is wonderful work. It's amazing work. But I also want to say that we need to do more. Everybody in this room is here for a reason. Like I said, they bring something to the table. But one missing element that is missing here is young people. And that element is how do we connect the next generation to nature? That is so important. I saw a dog running in off of the ski patrol the other day, and one of the ski patrollers told me, he says, that dog is the best dog in the world, and it was his dog. And I said, I kind of wrinkled my face at him and said, you can't say that. And I said, but if you tell them that enough times, they start believing it. You're the best dog in the world. Now you take what that little girl said, this is the most beautiful place in the world. You tell that to your child. You tell that to everyone you know. And all of a sudden, it may not resonate that first time you tell it to them. They'll look around, what is he talking about? What is mom talking about? But maybe the 15th, maybe the 1,000th time you talk to them, all of a sudden they get it. That nature feeds you in a way that is more important than anything else in the world. And right now, our system is kind of semi-broken. Why? We have a lot of experts, and we all have good intentions. We all do things in a good way, science. But we take out the fact that we don't elevate nature into its rightful place. The dominant world depends on money, power, control. What does man need? But in reality, we're not lifting nature to that sacred place so that it becomes full circle. So it's connecting those kids. So it's making sense, not just from one perspective of life, but it's a complete full circle. So we can go on and talk about many, many different things, but now I'm really starting to bring to the table. We need to, every plan that needs to be written needs to talk about that next generation and about elevating nature, because it's so important. Because if we lose that kinship to nature, I don't know what we have left, honestly. A world that's spiraling in a way that is not real anymore. For you to decide, really. It's really for you to decide. But like I said, I bring planting seeds in the way that we need to start bringing this thing full circle. And no one entity can do it by themselves. We need the help of everybody. So, in that, that's it.
Rene is always a hard act to follow. So I'm J.R. Logan. I'm a resident of San Cristobal. I'm president of the Asociación de Vecinos de San Cristobal, and I'm a member of what's called the Cerro Negro Forest Council. And I think I'm talking here today because what we're doing with the Cerro Negro Forest Council is sort of unique, and it touches on a lot of the things that have been discussed already. You know, about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, I was packing up a tent after throwing a pig roast at my place, and a neighbor and I were complaining about how wood season was coming up and how we weren't looking forward to having to drive an hour way out onto the mesa or go pick through scraps somewhere far from our house when we both live in this beautiful valley in San Cristobal that's surrounded by national forest land that's full of the kind of overstocked forests that these guys have been describing. And we thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if we could figure out a way that you and I could just drive, you know, through Junito's backyard to get firewood instead of driving an hour to go get firewood. And then we got all spun up on it. We said, yeah, and it would make the acequia run better because we would stop a lot of the erosion problems that we're having. And we said, yeah, and we would stop this problem of a fire coming up from Valdez and maybe burning into the valley and doing the same kind of damage that the Hondo fire did. And well, one thing led to another, and we found a lot of time on our hands, and we bought a lot of 12-packs of Tecate. And over the course of 6 months, started reaching out to our neighbors in San Cristobal and over the hill in Valdez and in Gallina Canyon, and started pitching this crazy idea of like, hey, let's organize a group, and let's see if that group can approach the Forest Service and say, we've got some ideas on how we can oversee ourselves. We can be our own policemen, we can be our own watchdogs. And if you trust us enough and we put enough safeguards in there, we'll do the thinning work for you, the stuff that you're talking about needing to do and that you're shelling out $800, $1,000, maybe more per acre. We just want to get there and do the work for free. And yeah, I mean, the impetus for that is firewood for sure, but what we found is more and more as we started shopping this idea around in our little valley, there's a lot of people who, especially older folks and families that have deep roots there, that have long, deep, strong connections to those same hillsides. And it's a lot more than just firewood, it's more than just leña. I mean, when they see that, they see like trips with their uncle to go get firewood, or they see chasing sheep up the hill and remembering times when they'd spend a few weeks up in the highlands, up on Louisville Peak, for instance, and then following the animals down and knowing where the springs are on that mountain. And they'd lost that connection in a lot of ways. And part of it's that their kids have moved away because they didn't have work, or part of it's that, you know, no offense to Jack, that the Forest Service has been a hard partner to work with, especially for these rural communities. So we together all convinced ourselves this was a good idea and decided to form what's called the Cerro Negro Forest Council. And I had the real advantage of working with a couple of people in this room that I want to acknowledge, is Sage Collin, who was a founding member of the council, a resident of Gallina Canyon. And Sage was going door to door in Gallina Canyon, knocking on doors of people that he didn't really know, neighbors of his, saying, hey, do you have a chainsaw and a pickup truck? Do you want to come get firewood? Do you want to put your name on this list? And then Mark Schutz right behind him was another really invaluable friend, somebody I've known for a long time and really respected because Mark's a doer. And Mark was gracious enough to share a lot of information with a newbie like me about, I mean, this is the equipment you need, this is what it costs to do an acre, this is the technical stuff. So in any event, our communities formed the Cerro Negro Forest Council, approached Jack Lewis with this idea. And Jack, whether it's because you're new and naive or just believed in us, bought into this notion, and we successfully put in an application to treat 300 acres on the north side of the Valdez Valley, right above Gallina Canyon, for those who are familiar with it. And that work's going to be done by guys like me and Sage and all of my neighbors in San Cristobal, guys with pickup trucks and chainsaws, under the oversight of our own forest council. We've hired a mayordomo, and that word might sound familiar to some of you. That's the acequia foreman, right? So on the acequia systems that function in these valleys, we share water without too many fights and in ways that are fair. We're doing the same thing with wood on our project area. So if you're a leñero, if you've got a chainsaw and a pickup, you get allocated a block. The mayordomo shows you where your block is. You go cut the wood. You get to keep all that firewood. This is piñon juniper. This is $225 a cord, cured and split. There's between 5 and in some places 10 cords of that wood. So there's a couple grand of money. Plus, if you do a good job and the mayordomo says you did so, you get a check for $300. And we have a list of 100 guys and gals in just Valdez and San Cristobal without announcing this thing. And I'm getting bothered every time I drop my kids off at school about, hey man, I want to get one of those blocks. We got to do this work. So the point I guess I'm trying to make is, we have the workforce here. These are people who have grown up in these mountains, who know these areas, who have the equipment, who are already going for firewood. Between Cuesta and Peñasco, they sell over 2,000 cordwood permits a year. That's a demand. People want to do this work, and there's organizations like Rocky Mountain Youth Corps, what's up boys, who are already training young people, and when they graduate that program, we're hoping to find more opportunities for them to be able to do this same work and not get shipped off to Oregon or Washington or Colorado, but be able to do that work in their own backyard. Thanks.
You can ask anybody anything, or you can make comments. Who would like to go first? Going first is the hardest one. Okay, thank you.
I'm curious, a lot of the maps that have been made of GIS person, is any of that data publicly available from any of these organizations?
And would you mind repeating the question into the mic? Sure.
I think you were commenting that you've seen some maps shown. Is that data publicly available?
No.
Sure. GIS data is so important. And a lot of the reports that you see nowadays about fire management plans are Bibles about that thick. But if an agency can come in that is running a fire and can come in and take a look at 5 to 10 key maps on the wall, they have their marching orders. They know what is important, where the resources are, what feeds the fire, what they need to herd this fire away from. Can they let it burn? And GIS does that. So it's called geospatial fire mapping, and we're working on a plan right now with the tribe so that every fire that starts, we want to let it burn. And that really is what needs to be done in the West. Can it burn, or in the conditions at a point, or is it near enough something that is so important that we cannot let this burn?
I think to specifically answer your question, yeah, all of the stuff that we've shown is publicly available, and if you want to I can give you a card, and we have an awesome GIS staff in San Jose that can hook you up with like all the publicly available stuff, and if you want something specifically from those studies, we can get you in touch with those researchers. It's a benefit of working with folks in San Jose.
I want to add one thing too, which is Chris Cote is here. He's the Wildland Urban Interface Coordinator for Taos County. The county has a ton of data, and so Chris is also a great resource. Did I get your title right? Okay, very good. What else? Are we
I
boring?
maybe should know this, but with this 600,000 acres, what do you have left every year? How much are you accomplishing every year? How long does this take?
Yeah, great question. And are there Rio Grande Water Fund brochures in the back? Did they not make it here?
Okay.
You've got them, okay. Why don't you get them out? That would be great, if you don't mind. So the Rio Grande Water Fund was launched in 2014 with this goal of 600,000 acres of restoration over 20 years. You break that down, that creates a target of about 30,000 acres of restoration a year. And the map that you're seeing on the wall, it's a little hard to read some of it. But let's see, does this work?
The laser?
There we go, okay. There's Albuquerque. This is just to give you a sense of scale. There's the Colorado-New Mexico state line. Here's the town of Taos. This red outline is the Taos Valley Watershed Coalition. All right, so I am getting to answer your question. What you see here are all the projects that are Rio Grande Water Fund projects. Again, this is cumulative, having started in 2014. When we did the tally at the end of the field season of 2018, we realized that between managed fire, thinning, and prescribed fire, that we had restored 108,000 acres in 4 years. So that was really proof that this idea of setting a stretch goal and then uniting people behind contributing to reach that goal actually works. And along the way, we built a partnership with more than 70 agencies, organizations, businesses, foundations, and partners. And we didn't really start to build a partnership that was that big, but it just turned out that that's what it takes to get this done. And since we don't have the right brochure, would you mind, do you have a slide in there that shows all the logos?
Oh, shoot.
I think it was towards the end, after Laura.
Yeah.
What fraction of the 100,000 was fire versus?
Okay, so the question was, what fraction of the 108,000 is from fire versus thinning? So I actually don't have those numbers with me exactly because they're in the brochure, and I was kind of relying on that instead of a refresher. But you got one? Okay, good. Then I can actually be accurate. That would be great. All right. So in 2018, 19,000 acres treated with controlled burns, 14,000 acres thinned, and you may remember that 2018 was exceptionally dry, so no acres accomplished with managed natural fire. Now, I was actually really blown away that we hit that controlled burn number. That was actually more acres than the prior year, and a lot of factors contributed to that. The prior year, which would be 2017, was a pretty wet year, reasonably wet, at least in the monsoon season. And that year we had almost, I think, if I'm remembering this right, 22,000 acres of managed natural fire, including several on the Carson National Forest. That was actually the first year that the Carson National Forest felt confident with the managed natural fire, and a lot of that was because of the partnerships that had been formed that created a supportive environment for the agency to take a little bit of risk, at least a perceived risk, if not an actual risk. Does anybody want to add to that?
I would add a little bit that again, that year was really good. Those fires were on Tres Piedras district up to the west, and they went really well because we could burn to natural areas, and we could burn to roads and that type of thing. And we had some plans on how that would take, if we were going to get an ignition there, how would we handle it? And we're working on those plans forest-wide to be able to say, hey, if we have something going here and the conditions are right, we can get some acreage out of this and get some treatment done and make sure that we've got, you know, some natural occurrences going on. So our goal is to have everything covered to where we always have that option if the conditions are right. And we won't always, I mean, it's going to be dry years, and we'll want to put them, you know, we'll want to be a little more cautious. But in the times where we can let nature do our dragger, instead of dragging torches, let nature do the work, we're going to keep working on that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll talk briefly about, well, I'll just start by saying there are these, if we had a heat map and we could sort of map where positive things are happening, well, we're kind of sitting in the epicenter of a very positive outcome. And you know, we have other areas in Colorado too where we're starting to see synergy, the right landscape, the right objectives, and the right people have all aligned to get good work done. And we're also seeing that here in New Mexico. And one example that Collin reminded me of is the all hands, all lands approach to prescribed fire. And that's where, you know, folks are basically all on the same page, the same sheet of music, and all want to burn cooperatively and collectively together to accomplish the same goal. And I think a big, you know, big result of those 19,000 acres, which is a lot of acreage, is a result of people coming together with a similar mission and objective and working through all hands, all lands across different agencies to accomplish similar objectives. And it's something that we'd like to glean and maybe copy and paste to Colorado at some point in a different context, slightly different context, but I think that lends itself to a lot of the success for those acres that have been burned down here.
We'll go to someone else. No, you. I'm sorry, I know your name, but I'm forgetting it at the moment.
Hi, Arnie Pinato. I wanted to toot Laura's horn a bit and the Nature Conservancy's horn a bit. I'm actually, we have a home in Santa Fe. I'm on the board of the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey. And I go to the national meetings, and very interested in what's happening in New Jersey and in New Mexico. I grew up in El Paso. The Rio Grande Water Fund project is a very important project for the Nature Conservancy in the United States. And as I recall, it was based in part on good work that the Nature Conservancy did outside the United States with the first really successful private-public partnership focused on water and other related issues occurring in Quito, Ecuador. And it was a pioneering initiative of the Nature Conservancy to bring together business and government and the population to solve a complex water problem. This idea of these water projects of private and public partnership have spread to different parts of the world, but hadn't been done yet in the United States. And Laura, as I understand it, was the first person to lead this initiative, to bring together this group of like-minded constituents together in a unique way to try to do something very important. And so the pilot project, the highlight project of the whole United States is in fact her project, all of your project here in New Mexico. And as I understand it, you get lots of calls from people all over the country, organizations, other Nature Conservancy organizations, and private and public organizations to find out how did you do it, how is it done, what are the tricks, pulling all these interests together. So I just think it's fantastic that it's here, it started here, and it's going to make a big difference here in New Mexico, but also around the country, because this is a pilot program that's really important to the country.
Other questions or comments? We still have about 5 minutes left. I'm not seeing anyone, so.
One here, Graham? Is Graham?
Okay, great.
Hi, Laura. Welcome back. General question for the panel, kind of a pet question of mine at the moment. Overall, if you could choose between 10% more funding or 10% more boots on the ground, which would you choose?
Okay, the question was, if overall, if you could choose between 10% more funding and 10% more boots on the ground, which would you choose? I have to ask a qualifier because one translates into the other. So you must be making some kind of distinction there in either or that is, I'm not grasping.
I know that a lot of money sometimes goes into administration when we're looking at like boots on the ground for all lands, all hands. Some of those folks are coming in on grant money, some of them are coming out of private entities. Just kind of the curious question is, what would be the greater benefit now? People actually in the dirt or trying to get the money to get the people in the dirt?
Well, okay, but very little goes into administration.
Oh,
I just
sure.
want to make that point. To me, they're not separable, but if somebody else has a different take on it.
Do you want to go ahead and take a stab at it?
Yeah, it's just real quick. If we got that chunk of money right now to the Forest Service, I would want to see boots on the ground because it's so hard to move our money around and get some things going with our administrative side. If it went to our partners, though, I could see a mix of some planning and some on-the-ground things. So I'd really actually prefer the money to go to our partners.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that it is tough to make that distinction, but I think that money allows you to leverage bigger things. So 10% more money will give you the opportunity to potentially get more people on board in order to increase staffing. I know TNC Colorado and TNC New Mexico work pretty closely with some private entities that are implementing prescribed fire through the all hands, all lands model, the Forest Stewards Guild, for example. And if I had 10% more money, then it would enable me to go and seek more funds as match to try and maybe offer more work and time for the Forest Stewards Guild or other folks like them to get more work done and more boots on the ground. So it's kind of, I guess, my answer is both.
Yeah, and I would only add, I'm going to preface this by saying we want money, so don't get me wrong, money's great. But, the group that I'm working with, a lot of these local folks who want to do the work, they want proof that this is an actual thing and that work is happening, and they want to see the evidence of it. So Graham, I think to answer your question, we want boots on the ground, but more importantly, we want evidence that the work is really happening and evidence that it's happening in their backyards and that it's benefiting them in a real way. And it's not just more meetings for meeting's sake and panel discussions and that kind of stuff. That stuff is actually happening.
I got a kind of practical question. When you get a forest, do you just do dead and down trees, or is it live trees, or is there any kind of, how do you decide how much spacing between the trees?
Great question. I'm going to repeat it first, though, and the question is essentially, when you're thinning, how do you decide which trees to take out and which trees to leave? Is that an accurate summary?
Yes.
Okay.
So it depends, of course, on where you're at, how thick the area's been, how long it's been since it's been treated or had anything happen to it at all. But we do treat live trees as well as dead trees. We try to get out we're just trying to make it as, on the video when they were showing this is what a stand should look like. That's a lot of times what we're going for, but that doesn't fit everywhere. So we write prescriptions for what works best for the local area, and that's going to give the best bang for the buck long term.
One more comment. So I live in Canyon, lived there many years, and we're always concerned with the Rio Grande, the water coming down there. Everybody's always talking about how we improve the Rio Grande so we can get more water into our acequia. And really nothing is done. But what about going to the acequia system? I know there's a lot of people in my acequia association that would really help and want to do this and be involved.
Actually, Collin can answer it. Well, I think
The question generally is how do we involve more people from the Acequia Association in this work? The answer is we're doing that in the Rio Fernando, exactly. And so there's a collaborative called the Rio Fernando Revitalization Collaborative. That's goal is to revitalize the river and make the watershed from top to bottom healthy again. And it's a combination of, we're a part of it. There's the Acequia Associations, the Taos Valley Acequia Association is part of it, Amigos Bravos, the Forest Service. It's actually both of those dots in the Taos Valley watershed are in the Rio Fernando. We've got county and town elected officials. Taos Land Trust is all part of that project, and the goal is to do exactly what you're saying, to maximize all of the pieces that we can add to it and get to a thing that's better than the sum of our parts, right? And it's been, I think, 2 years now in its development. We've already had a couple projects, implemented, and the Forest Service is getting ready to do some work around that area. So stuff is happening because of that collaborative group.
Are we done, or last one?
Oh,
Annie,
well,
you get to decide.
This is what I have decided, and we are done, but what I've done is I've asked our presenters to stay behind for a few minutes. We actually have the space for longer, and so they are here to answer your questions. Feel free to cluster. It's just going to be a smaller, more intimate format, but I like to stick to the schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, help me thank everyone for being here.